More like Violet Evergarden, am I right? I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. Bad jokes aside, Violet Evergarden is an anime about considerably more than just trying to make the viewer cry. It's about a few different things. Trauma, guilt, learning to live again, and learning to live in the first place. And I'll talk about all of those things where they exist within the scope of the story, but at its core, Violet is an anime about bonds, and the importance they can hold, whether those bonds are enduring or fleeting. Even when impermanent, Violet emphasizes that bonds are paramount, and that every meaningful interaction you have with others causes ripples and waves. Winter 2018 is certainly a season to remember, what with Darling in the Franxx, Seiyuu Camp, and A Place Further Than the Universe all airing at the same time. But one anime was stuck in the jail cell at Netflix HQ at the time, one that I still managed to catch week to week. For those 13 weeks on what for me were some lonely winter nights, Violet pulled me in and captivated me in such a way that all other thoughts became superfluous. Time always seemed much longer during those 20 short minutes each week. I'm not going to talk about the part where I cried sometimes because that should be obvious. The individual episodes are disconnected from each other just enough that I got a satisfying episodic experience. But by the end of the movie, which I was finally able to watch over a year after its release, everything converges to create a wonderful, cohesive whole. A whole that, for the better, remains tethered to the human experience through the bonds Violet forms with other people, despite all its philosophical waxing. Throughout Light and Shaftlick, in foreign nations, and across enemy lines, Violet forms bonds, learning about emotions and slowly developing her understanding of others, and of herself. That's the crux of what I want to talk about in this episode of Anime in Retrospect, but I feel that it's impossible to discuss the story and ending of Violet Evergarden without first acknowledging what happened to Kyoto Animation. And it's an utter tragedy, to say the absolute least. But that's not the note I want to dive into. Instead, I just want to commend and thank KyoAni for giving us such an incredible ending for this instant classic in spite of the challenges they've faced. The film is superlative across the board, and is one of the clearest expressions of love for art I've had the pleasure of seeing. KyoAni gave it their all in the face of everything, and that speaks volumes. The visual production, needless to say, is breathtaking. A never-ending onslaught of beauty that oftentimes looks better than the real world. KyoAni gave us what's easily the A5 Wagyu beef of the anime medium. The city of Leiden reminds me of Neo Venezia from the Aria series, providing that same lived-in feeling and like there's potential for a new secret around every corner. Much of this warm atmosphere, not to mention the physical beauty which supports it, we can attribute to series art director Mikiko Watanabe, who has sadly passed on. Half of the episodes don't even take place within Leiden. Some of Violet's clientele live in different countries, and even though these settings are mostly one-time deals that we only get to see for one episode, they still look and feel just as developed as Leiden. The castle of Drossel, the playwright's house, and the high-altitude observatory are all detailed enough that we could easily see more episodes playing out in these settings. And while this high-effort, amazing, everywhere-you-look approach is definitely one of my favorite aspects of the TV anime, Eternity and the Auto Memory Doll is somehow even more beautiful. It's insane how jaw-dropping the scenery is for this movie. A movie that is self-proclaimed to be a simple, unassuming side story. That has to be one of the best flexes by a studio in anime history. Yeah, all this? This isn't even part of the main dish. It's just for a side story. The script for it is as good as the art is, and that shouldn't even be possible. I mean, look at this. But enough about how great it looks. It's time to move on with the real retrospective. Like any other anime, Violet does have its fair share of issues. The story, characters, and the emotional beats they deliver candidly reached me, even if the overall setting that allows all that to excel is a little bit contrived. It's exoteric by design, made to appeal to and resonate with as many people as possible. But even so, Violet Evergarden ended up being the best experience I've had with an airing anime to date, and for me has become Kyoto Animation's crown jewel. The idea of watching Violet become someone who embodies her name is corny, no doubt, but the execution made me forget I ever thought that in the first place. So with that, this is my retrospective on Violet Evergarden. To begin with, the movie and thus the ending of the story goes pretty much how I expected it to, and I think it's safe to say that most people had this same experience. What I expected to happen, at least where the climax and resolution are concerned, happened for the most part. The Major being alive, or well, kind of just alive in general, was all but a guarantee. Yeah, can't really call that much of an existence. By all means, Violet Evergarden could have told a different story, but with the setup provided, Violet may not have been a story worth telling without Gilbert coming into play at some point. After all, no matter how much Violet develops her sense of self, no matter how much she learns about emotions or how much she comes to understand others, she still ends up relapsing into that puppy dog state where, at times, the progress she's made seems to vanish entirely. Her dependency issues with Major Bougainvillea, or her instinct to want to follow orders. With this uncomfortable emphasis on these potential relapses popping up at a moment's notice, it can feel like her journey is in vain at times. Violet's tendency to laser focus on whatever is in front of her has made for some of the best moments in the story, such as when she grows adorably concerned with how the playwright's story is going to end, but it also acts as a double-edged sword, like when she wants orders from the captain during the train attack. And so, while the film does go how I expected in general, the specifics within the narrative are nothing like what I imagined. What I mean by that is the nature of the original predicament we see Violet face. She wakes up without the person she's grown cripplingly attached to, the first person to ever show her kindness, in a hospital bed. She doesn't know where that person is, and is eventually faced with a reality that worsens her situation when she learns that the Major is probably dead. I figured from the very beginning of the anime that not only is he almost certainly alive, but that he is also intentionally staying away from Violet so she can learn how to live. Specifically, how to live without him, so that she can develop her own roadmap, and as Gilbert tells her, so that she can be free. That's why when it's revealed in the film that Gilbert's intent in staying out of the picture is ever so distant from such a wholesome idea, it had a more crushing effect on me than I think was actually intended, and it is certainly designed to feel crushing. Naturally, I did expect him to feel guilty for, using Violet as a human weapon, but I didn't think that would be half of the reason behind Ye Olde Vanishing Act. The other half being, as Gilbert himself puts it, that he doesn't deserve Violet. And he absolutely does not deserve Violet. The most difficult scene to watch in the entire series, for me, is this one. The one where Violet can't stand the pining separation any longer and tries to end everything herself. This right here, folks, is the biggest reason why the Major doesn't deserve Violet. At this point in the story, anyway. Oh, he's trying to help her passively by not being in the picture for a while so she can learn to live without her extreme dependency issue getting in the way. Right? It was just an unintended consequence, right? No. This motherfucker. I almost called the police.
You know what makes me angry? This is Clyde. And this...
And this! What's he doing?
Is how angry I am for every waking moment that ED page is up.
The whole situation has so much it seemed like a good idea at the time energy. I really hope that everyone else felt as frustrated with Gilbert as I did here. But thankfully, after the night there's morning, after the storm there's calm. It was great to see Violet find her own purpose after such a horrifying struggle. Happening upon and seeing the physical proof of her impact on the world around her, that hit me, that hit you, that hit everyone. The play she helped write, enjoying advertisement, a newspaper article about the prince and the princess she helped bring together, it's all because of her. This is my favorite scene in the TV anime, and not just because it's unequivocally touching. It's because no matter what the reason Gilbert has for leaving her alone, Violet finally stands up on her own 2 feet. Here, she decides to become someone who embodies their name, to chase after those words with fervor. But the real beauty of this moment is that we know she's already achieved it. Even after this, it isn't as though it's all just sunshine and rainbows going forward. It's not without more internal struggle and doubt. It's not easy for Violet to avoid falling back into the only identity she knew for so long. Staying grounded in this human experience, in this series of emotional ups and downs, adds a layer of realism that makes Violet Evergarden into more than just cheap tearjerker material. Anyone who isn't a contrarian by trade should realize that. This duality even defines the experience in a way. Without the sad cry valleys, the happy cry peaks wouldn't reach the heights that they do. In this way, there are no valleys in Violet Evergarden, only higher peaks. When Violet decides to leave Ecarte after failing to reunite with Gilbert, she says in her letter to him that hearing him say, "I love you," has been like a guiding light in her life. And well, yeah, without that light, she pretty much is like a lost puppy. It's her main motivator for nearly everything she does. But as she develops her personality, there does come nuance in her individual desires and tendencies that lift her characterization up beyond what her state is at the beginning of the story. She becomes so personally invested in the lives of complete strangers because she is learning how to relate to others for the first time. Like with the soldier on the front lines, jumping into an active war zone just to record his final words, or when she learns about Amy and Taylor in the masterful side story. Violet's character arc achieves a great deal in slowly contextualizing the emotions she's felt but has failed to identify for her entire life. Claudia tells her in one of the first episodes that she is burning and that she has wounds all over. And while this scene is thoroughly needless at the time and scripted in a way that is altogether too conspicuous, the later payoff makes it very worthwhile, even if it sticks out like a sore thumb to begin with. This is where we see that long process of contextualizing her feelings really begin in earnest. In the opening scene of the anime, we see the moment when Violet receives her brooch, the first of many instances of this scene. It might seem as though this scene sees too much reuse, and it kind of does, but the context is different each time. The recurring visual motif used in nearly every episode where the deep green of the brooch swirls around signals that in spite of how much better Violet has gotten, and regardless of her newfound independence, Gilbert is always at the forefront of her mind, steering her interactions with others. "I love you" is a guiding light for Violet, yes, but at certain times it seems like more of an anchor. It's no secret that Violet steals the show and eclipses all the other characters combined, and we mainly have the actress who plays her to thank for that. Yui Ishikawa. I could listen to Yui Ishikawa talk forever. Her performance as Violet is something I know I'll never hear recreated anywhere else, with myriad subtleties that compound to create a truly unique character. The ever-present wounded tone and the stunted way of speaking especially lend to the whole enrapturing effect of just listening to her talk. The best effect these have, though, is easily on Violet's social unawareness, which leads her to be hilariously blunt all the time, inadvertently T-posing on everyone she interacts with as a result. Although this tendency to interpret everything she hears in a literal way can also result in moments like this, so it isn't all bad. And Takehito Koyasu's performance as Claudia Hodgins does not get old. Never would have guessed that the dude who plays this fucking psychopath, and plenty of other psychopaths, could play such a convincing and wholesome father figure. Speaking of characters who aren't Violet, the squad at CH Postal have enough effort put into them that they don't feel like the life-size John Cena cutout I used to have when I was a kid. I mean, that they don't feel like characters who are just there to fill space, even though their arcs can mostly be considered flat. Catalea is unabashedly a doting Onesan, and while the anime does have its cliches, it's clear that there is no room for ultra-archetypal cardboard cutout to your character writing. Erica, and I guess Iris too, are the only ones who work at CH Postal, other than Violet, to actually get rounded arcs. Unless you count Taylor, which we positively should, because she's totally an employee no matter what anyone says about it. Also, I just had to mention this. Why is the patriarch of the Bougainvillea family voiced by Joji Nakata? You know, Yorokobe Shonen. I recognize that voice anywhere. The dude is one of my favorite actors. Even though he only gets a couple of lines, I can't help but feel like this casting choice is a bit out of place, but out of place in a way that makes it into my most pleasant surprise of the movie. And what a movie. This final installment of the story, as I mentioned earlier, definitely goes how I think many of us expected it to. However, the execution more than makes up for any predictability. Brilliantly, the story starts out on a note that intimately connects the film and the TV anime, deepening our relationship with the world the story takes place in. Anne's granddaughter, happening upon the letters Violet wrote for her dearly departed grandmother, is already like the best place anyone could have thought of to begin this ending to a story that champions the bonds people form and how those last over time. And while Anne, Charlotte, the opera singer, and the playwright all come back into play at some point or another during the film, the astronomer and soldier episodes feel fairly isolated from the others since, well, the former moments see little nods here and there, and the latter ones don't. which makes them the most ephemeral in that sense, but both still display bonds that are as important for Violet as any other, showing off more of an understated legacy. Anne and her mother get the biggest homage through their ancestor's role in the prologue and epilogue. The playwright sees his homage via Erica becoming his assistant. The opera singer reads the hymn to the sea, and Charlotte's, while very quiet in comparison, is at least there. But to be honest, I'll take that. It adds a little bit of mystery to the world by omitting what ended up happening with the astronomer. Not in a lazy way, but in a way that feels poetic. We don't know how his encounter with Violet ended up helping him in the long run, but I think we know that it did turn out well, because that's just the kind of effect Violet tends to have on people. Just like how the very intentional choice to initially not let us hear Violet's hymn to the sea is art in itself. We know by now through the many letters she's written that she's done justice to it, so this choice to omit that left me feeling fulfilled beyond belief. The insane quality of the movie may shine greatest when everything swells all at once, during the scene where Claudia explodes at Gilbert, right after hearing him basically tell Violet to scram, like a dog owner rejecting their dog with severe separation anxiety. The music soars to one of its most satisfying heights yet, the visual composition is impossible to look away from, and the emotional level across the board reaches new pinnacles, creating, for me, the most standout moment of the entire series. It was one thing watching Violet over the years as new releases were made available, but sitting down to rewatch the entire thing for the purpose of collecting my thoughts for this retrospective emotionally exhausted me. This scene is the second time I have needed to take a break from an anime because of how much it took out of me just to sit there and watch it, with the only other instance of this happening to me being during the Made in Abyss movie Dawn of the Deep Soul. Not to be outdone by the visuals, the score is dynamic and doesn't see too much reuse. Some of the highlights of the OST only ever occur once or a couple times each, making the moments they're attached to feel as exceptional as they're supposed to. At times, the music can feel a little bombastic or overly self-important, depending on the context of the scene it's used in, but the highs more than make up for the lows. Back to this scene for a minute though. Gilbert seems like a trash can for refusing to see Violet, and it's easy enough to hate him and blame him for everything, but it's only that simple if you miss the entire point. Gilbert is only human too, and he's a character in a very human story. The situation is so much deeper than just Gilbert bad, and it demands that we also see things through his point of view. The first thing the anime ever shows us is Violet's extreme dependency, her struggle with being in the dark with her own feelings, and yeah, Gilbert's guilt. It's all right there in the very first minute. Some of these may just seem like writing fumbles with a couple of why would anyone realistically do that moments, but I think that is also part of the point. Everyone makes mistakes. It's one of the most human things there is. Yes, it's cliché, but clichés exist because they're effective. They become cliched because they keep working, and there is nothing wrong with that as a writing element. Gilbert's initial rejection of Violet instills more worth in the bonds she's so easily been able to form with everyone else. It's a cruel irony, but that contrast between the bonds attained without difficulty and the one bond that's so far out of reach epitomizes the main conflict at the story's center. The most bizarre bond Violet has is incontestably the bond she shares with the certified asswipe brother of Gilbert, Navy Captain Dietfried Bougainvillea, who Netflix hilariously does not fail to sub as Diethard for whatever reason. The captain sees part of himself in Violet here, and while this is a strange relationship, they're able to find solace in that. They both can't forget about Gilbert. It's too difficult a task for either of them. The scene where he invites Violet to his childhood boat shows that he's grown past his despicable and honestly extremely annoying mindset that Violet is contemptible because she did lots of war stuff, and now is part of normal society. Yeah, she participated in the same war he did, being forced into hellish infantry brutality while he got to sit back in his captain's chair and call the shots. I am very willing to forgive Gilbert for his role in Violet's struggle given his overall ignorance of the situation, but I had a hard time with this guy, although less so once he turns a new leaf come the events of the film. Especially gratifying is the moment near the end where the brothers finally reunite. Here, Dietfried finds his younger brother disfigured, bent out of his mind, ridden with grief, and far beyond the end of his rope. This moment is where the narrative comes full circle. Dietfried tells him that he will assume the role of continuing their family's legacy, and that Gilbert can live free, just as Gilbert told Violet near the beginning of the timeline. Both brothers have been in positions to decide someone else's fate, and in both instances, that someone is the person who they care about most. I do have to wonder, though, that if it weren't for practically losing Gilbert and already being well into the grieving phase, even nearing acceptance, would Dietfried have been so benevolent? Especially combined with seeing Gilbert occupy such a remote mental extremity, that probably played an influential role there. Regardless, this artistic execution of bringing it all back to where it began is one of those highlights that I just know I won't be able to stop thinking about. If only Gilbert and Claudia could have buried the hatchet too after those particularly awful spats. It's probably safe to say that after the events of the story, when C.H. Postal obviously pays a visit to the Isle of Ecarte for Violet's sake, that there is some sort of resolution between Claudia and Gilbert. However, if there is one more thing I could have chosen to see in the end, it would have been their long-awaited reunion. But some reunions we aren't meant to see, and others are so impactful that they serve as the climax of the entire shebang. Yeah, this one was a long time coming.
We are going to be together in the near future, and we are going to have sex. We're going to lose our virginities to each other, and it's going to be awesome.
I know that there are a lot of us who never really cared much for the main relationship at the very heart of the series, and that many of us were having a better time with Violet Evergarden when it was about learning to live for the first time. But for me, as I watched Violet standing there sobbing, while the incalculable tension she's built up seems to leave her all at once through a howling whirlpool, I can't say that didn't change for me a little. Through all of Violet's personal growth, even after the great strides she's made, their bond endured as if it were the most natural thing in the world. There's the extremely unhealthy side to this we've had to painstakingly watch up until this point, and there's the immensely gratifying joy that comes with seeing it pay off for Violet, all at once and in a massive emotional storm. Two very different sides of the very same coin, the guiding light and the anchor. Violet Evergarden takes that dark side of things, contrasts it with the light, and makes it look beautiful. I came to love both sides of Violet by the end of this movie. The same Violet who learned to relate to and significantly help others can still revert back to the Violet who can't even help herself. And, dare I say it again, there is infinite beauty to be found in that. Now that it's all said and done, and with the dust settled, I can say with relative certainty that Violet Evergarden is an experience which will be nearly impossible to match for many years to come. Yeah, another anime that goes for quote, cheap, unquote, emotional grabs could always come along, and boy would the pro-contrarians have a field day with that. But as it stands, nothing really packs the same sort of punch for me. It's moving at every turn, even where it may not be trying to have that effect. The Eurus subplot binds all the elements of the movie together super well. Eurus is like the dude selling hot dogs at a baseball game. He isn't why we go to the game, just like Eurus isn't the reason we watched this movie, but it just wouldn't be the same without him. Similarly, Eurus makes the story whole. In one of the scenes, Violet shows Eurus that she understands how he feels about his little brother, even though she can't relate to having siblings. This comes directly after the boat scene, where Dietfried fully realizes that not only can he relate to Violet, where before he didn't even recognize her as a person, but that now, she can relate to him too. The quiet interconnectedness of these two scenes is just incredibly eloquent in its expression of this subtext. Then the mad lads in charge of the movie do the same thing again later when Eurus passes on. Here, Eurus' little brother reads the letter written for him. In the letter, Eurus apologizes to his little brother, doing the right thing, bringing him untold joy, and wishing him the best. Not long after, Dietfried and Gilbert reunite, where Dietfried also apologizes, and in a similar spirit, he wishes his little brother the best, too. This movie is a fucking masterclass in storytelling. Eurus represents everything Violet has learned about being human, and serves to connect the person we've watched her become to the climax and resolution of the story. After all, when you're dead and gone, the only things you leave behind are the people who remember you, and the stupid shit you post on the internet, so Violet has a lot to say about what really matters most in life. Kyoto Animation really pulled out all the stops once again for Violet Evergarden. Whether it was Naoko Yamada's storyboarding, Taichi Shidate's directing, or Haruka Fujita's directing in Eternity, they crafted an impassioned gem that champions new beginnings. It shows the extent of how one person, no matter where they came from or how little they may think of themselves, can deeply affect the people and world around them. Violet's legacy, encapsulated in the stamp at the end of the film, is symbolic of all this. It's symbolic of how every bond is meaningful, no matter how brief, and how they all endure in their own ways. It's symbolic of how even the ones that just seem like the side stories of our lives can still make a serious splash in a universe of entropy. So if there's anyone who truly embodies their name, well, let's just say that I'll never forget this anime. But above all, I know I'll never forget about
Violet Evergarden です。
Alright guys, I know this is my first video in a while if you don't count the re-upload of my Heaven's Feel video. That's because I had a run-in with the copyright police for a little bit, but it's all been sorted out. Expect videos with greater frequency going forward. Violet Evergarden is a perpetual barrage of powerful moments, and I'm glad I had the chance to sit down and write this video about it. If you want to discuss Violet or really any anime, then all you need to do is ask down in the comments. These videos are partly think pieces for my own satisfaction, but I always encourage discussion, because if I liked something enough to make a 20-something minute video about it, I also like it enough to discuss it indefinitely. Anyway, please hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. Please consider subscribing for more anime in Retrospect, and maybe check out my other content as well. You can find links for that stuff, as well as for my Discord server and Twitter, in the description down below. Thanks for watching the video, sayonara, and I'll see you again.